Good evening, everybody, and welcome to this week's Squawk Talk, a day late. I'm delighted to be joined this evening by my Socialist Telly colleague, Bonnie Craven, by Liverpool legend Alan Gibbons, and by Unite legend Howard Beckett. And I think we're going to have a full and perhaps fiery evening with a bit of luck. So let's jump straight in. Thank you to everybody for watching, by the way, and do spread the word and make sure you do the subscribe bits, etc. But let's start with the low-hanging fruit in terms of things to get us going. And we congratulated on Sunday Wes Streeting on his recovery from cancer, on being cancer-free and back at work. Sadly, he's used that being back at work in order to write for the Murdoch press in the form of the newspaper that we don't normally name here in Liverpool. Let's call them the Scum. And not only write for them, but tweet about writing for them, and then get praised for writing for them by a bunch of other centrist MPs, and that's provoked a fair bit of outrage locally and elsewhere. So, Alan, you're the other most local one to me. So let's start off with you and see what do you make of all that?
Oh, where do you start? I mean, this week a coroner ruled that Andrew Devine, 55 years old, was unlawfully killed. He becomes the 97th victim of the Hillsborough disaster. Now, this should matter to Wes Streeting, not just because the SUN's editor, Kelvin Mackenzie, chose to lie with the infamous headline, The Truth, not just because the rag failed to apologise properly for a year, not just because there's an active boycott of this lie sheet, not just because Liverpool is Labour's most impregnable stronghold. The reason Wes Streeting should never have considered writing for the SUN is that it's morally wrong. Sometimes principles matter more than vote chasing. Sometimes integrity trumps trimming your message to squirm into office by any means necessary, even if it means slinging every human value out the window. What makes this doubly sick to me is that the leadership at the moment isn't even good at playing this lowest common denominator game, as we fail to hammer the most floundering government in my lifetime. By default, Labour should align itself with working class people, and there's no more graphic example than the Hillsborough victims and their families. By default, it should stand against injustice. By default, it should recoil at any connection with this union-busting, sexist, racist toilet paper that is Murdoch's organ. I think Mr. Streeting, dead simple, should feel ashamed of himself. And sadly, I think he really doesn't. From the tip of his manufactured coiffed hair to the bottom of his expensive shoes, he doesn't understand our outrage. He doesn't understand that working class people, and they've been betrayed and rubbished in this way by the most foul newspaper, one that actually was proud of defeating the Labour Party at general election under Kinnock. If he doesn't understand that, he doesn't understand anything. And to be so pugnacious was actually doubly offensive. I couldn't believe the tweets when I looked at them. Do you know what I mean? It's almost as if they want to cock a snook at some of the people that have been most offensively denigrated for decades. I think that's contemptible.
Yeah, so I mean, there was he's defended himself on Twitter by saying, yes, he has written for the Sun. Voters read the Sun, and we absolutely want to talk to them. And the well-known agitator account on Twitter responded with pictures of, I think it's the Daily Mail praising the black shirts and various other fascist newspapers, and said, well, these are all newspapers that have circulated in this country and are read by voters. Are you going to appear in those as well? And I think that about puts that argument to bed, really. But I mean, Howard, you as a member of the NEC, or erstwhile member of Labour's NEC, have probably had more exposure to some of these people than anyone. So I mean, give us your take on Mr. Streeting's stance and actions.
Well, Alan's covered it. It's a matter of principle, isn't it? Like, it's extraordinary, isn't it, to think of this rag and its coverage of Hillsborough, its coverage, the Wapping dispute, the Millie Dowler affair, saying that junior doctors should be dismissed. It goes on and on, the list of attacks on working class communities from the Sun. And what it reveals is a lack of morality, a lack of integrity on the part of Wes Street. You should not be cozying up to these people. You must make a stance. This is not a newspaper that is a friend of working class people. It is an instrument of the state. It is designed to keep working class people in their place. And Labour MPs have to recognise that. And as Alan said, it's bad enough writing for them. It would be bad enough giving an interview to them. But then to promote it on your own Twitter account and have your fellow MPs, the likes of Johnny Reynolds, who, you know, comes from Ellesmere Port, having them follow you in and retweet the fact that you have written for the Sun without any regard as to what this paper and what Murdoch is responsible for in this country. This is a man who attacked the trade union movement, the very bedrock of working class communities, intent on destroying it. And here we have Labour MPs proud of it. And I have to say, the excuse that people read the Sun is no excuse whatsoever. This is a reflection now of why us as a movement need to have a debate about where we go to with the media. Are we going to be in bed with 5 billionaire barons who are in charge of the country, in charge of the establishment? Are we going to be in bed with the establishment media that fails to tackle any injustices in working class communities? Or are we as a movement going to grab the nettle and say that we need to support alternative media? Here we are tonight talking through alternative media, as if we as a movement do not have a resource there to tackle the stranglehold that the likes of Murdoch has over the media. We do, and we have to use it. And it's why, obviously, Steve, throughout the Unite GS election, I was talking of the importance of Unite TV, because we have to now reject this idea that we are all in this stranglehold going forward. We have to say that there's another way. And if we start talking to working class communities, they will accept there's another way. And by the way, the people of Liverpool, as fantastic as they are not unique in respect of having socialist ethics, are not unique in respect of believing in collectivism. If we get that message out there about communities, about the strength of collectivism, about the strength of solidarity, about being able to stand up to bad bosses and stand up to the establishment and run your own city, if we get that message out there, it will be successful. It's always, and I'll finish with this, Steve, it's always amazed me with the mainstream establishment that they never cover the Durham Miners Gala. And the reason why they never covered the Durham Miners Gala is they do not want the rest of the nations to know what it's like when working class people come together to strengthen themselves through solidarity and collectivism. And they're worried that if they cover the Durham Miners Gala, that all communities around the country will think, hang on a second, we have our own history. Why don't we celebrate our history and at the same time give a message to the next generation that there is something better tomorrow than they've had already? And that's what we have to now say. How are we going to use alternative media to make sure that people no longer pick up the Sun in their workplace, but understand the politics of the Sun, understand that it is a part of the instrument of the state, understand that it is no friend of working people, understand that it is right at the centre of the fight between capital and working class ethos, and reject it in order to go for alternative media. And finally, obviously, Steve, we're in an era of prescribing at the moment, and maybe we should, seeing as we're prescribing groups of people, no less for believing that capital and working class issues are in perpetual struggle with each other and may well result in revolution. We're prescribing people for believing in such a terrible idea that capital and working class issues do not coalesce. Well, let's start by prescribing people who write for a rag like the Sun with all its history and all of its attacks on working class communities. And let's say, as a matter of principle, that those who write for the Sun or give interviews for the Sun, including Gerard Coyne, who's a candidate in our GS election, have no place in our movement, let alone leadership of our movement.
Well said. I mean, Bonnie, you're one of these socialists from outside Liverpool that Howard mentioned, so I'm going to come on to you in just one tick. But there was actually, I'll come on to you now and I'll raise the other thing afterwards. But how does all this look from down in the smoke then?
Absolutely shocking. Obviously, the Millie Dowler story was just down the road from where I live. Private investigator was actually in my borough. So, you know, his range of hate and hatred spreads right across the country. It's, you know, it's not just And I say just is a really inappropriate word here, but it isn't just what happened with the 96 or 97 as they now are. It's utter contempt for the people that he's pitching the very publications he's responsible for producing to. You know, these are the people that he denigrates, are the very people that then go and put their money on the counter in the newsagents and walk away with this newspaper. But I mean, I was going to say about, we're supposedly a socialist democratic party. And it seems to me that people who are prepared to cozy up with people that set out to hurt us, such as Murdoch, they're the ones that ought to see the whip removed. Not Jeremy Corbyn. It's got to be these people that are working against our interests, first of all.
Yes.
You know, that's, and the other good bit of news about that newspaper is that just recently Murdoch downgraded their value to zero, because apparently the sales have fallen by about a quarter, which is great. But actually, no newspaper makes its revenue from selling newspapers. It makes its revenue from selling the advertisements in there. So I think maybe as a movement, we need to start looking at who is paying to keep the Sun alive, and start looking at the companies that advertise in that rag. And recently, there was a couple of years ago, there was a campaign where they were giving Lego, get sets of Lego and so on. And there was a concerted effort amongst parents to make sure that we just bought the Lego sets, didn't wait to collect the coupons to send off for them from the Sun. They use all sorts of tactics and techniques. Yeah. Cheap holidays is another thing that they do to try and sell papers. We've got to not only boycott the Sun, but boycott the companies that are happy to do promotional tie-ins with them.
Yes, I agree with that. I mean, the point I was going to throw in was the fact that, I mean, a few people have, you know, kind of taken an attack on the streeting issue by quoting Keir Starmer, and pointed out that during his leadership campaign last year, he said he wasn't going to give any interviews to that rag.
I was there, Steve.
Sorry,
I was in the front row when
I was watching it.
Right, said it, and people cheered to the echo. I don't like grandstanding. I mean,
well, they didn't listen. I mean, they didn't listen is my point, because he said, "I won't give any interview. There won't be any interviews with the SUN during this campaign." Well. What about after the campaign? You know, that means nothing. And you know, and was typical in my view of the kind of weasel approach of the whole thing, that you know, let's do what we can do to fool people, but then as soon as we get the chance, you know. But I want to, you know, it's not just people from London. I mean, it's not very long since IPSO, the regulator so-called for the mainstream press, had exonerated one of the senior Sun writers who had written a headline about Britain's Muslim problem, which was extremely kind of racist, chillingly racist language, you know, very reminiscent of other periods, and decided that because he wasn't targeting a particular person, it wasn't hate speech. So it was okay to, you know, demonize Muslims as a whole, as long as you don't name an individual. And it was insane. But, you know, it's been the Irish people, you know, plenty during the Thatcher years, but also, you know, particularly when the Birmingham Six were wrongly convicted, those who were trying to campaign to get them released were thoroughly attacked and ridiculed for doing so, and those guys turned out to be innocent. We've seen the attacks on GRT, Gypsy Roma people. We've seen attacks on benefit claimants. We've seen the hacking of the phones of murder victims and their families. We've seen attacks on striking doctors trying to get a decent pay rise out of the Tories, etc. It's not a rag that anybody in the Labour movement should be getting near. On that point, we'll segue on to unions. I mean, you know, there is a link, because we've seen one of the contestants, as Howard referred to in the Unite contest for the General Secretary position, during the last contest, wrote in the Sun to appeal to people to, you know, vote against, as Len McCluskey as it was at the time, to get rid of these leftists from Unite. And he was appealing, you know, got in there specifically because they were extremely right wing. And you know, we've seen him write for them again now. We've seen the Sun back Gerard Coyne. So Howard, give us the latest on what's going on with the union race, and why anybody who hasn't cast a vote yet should be making sure to put it on a particular candidate, let's say.
Well, you know, the latest is that the voting, I think, closes on the 23rd of August, and we should have the result on it on the 25th of August. It's vitally important, obviously, and we've encouraged all members to partake. you know, trade unions, Steve, I'm sure you know, I'm sure most people, however, out here watching don't know, are subject still to Thatcher's laws in respect of how they conduct their own internal elections. So the internal elections have to be conducted by post. This is the complete contradiction whenever we're attacked by the Tories or attacked by the right wing generally, that people say that there's a democratic deficit between the leadership of the trade unions and its members. Well, of course, there's a democratic deficit whenever you have archaic methods of voting, such as the posts, and that's true, obviously, for industrial ballots that then have a threshold, and the intention is that working people cannot get above those thresholds, and post is one of the methods by which the establishment tries to stop us gaining the thresholds. And then it's true also of our own internal elections, which cost a fortune because they have to be carried out by post, and then have little participation because people do not participate in post right here and now. And obviously the worry that we all have is that this plays to the agenda of the right wing, who do not want participation in the Unite General Secretary elections. They do not want participation generally across the movement. They want to be able to control the movement by a lack of democracy, and that's why it's so vitally important that Unite members do cast their vote. And people will know that I withdrew from the race in the interests of left unity. It was a big fear of mine that with 4 people on the ballot paper, that Gerard Coyne would come through and have his own constituency from the previous election, and that they would repeat their vote for him, and that the other 3 would split their vote, and as a consequence, the union would end up at the hands of Gerard Coyne. And while people may well have their problems, people who backed myself may well have their problems with me pulling out, the reality for the movement is that Unite falling into the hands of the establishment, falling into the hands of Gerard Coyne right here and now, would be a tragedy for our movement and would put us back, in my view, at least 10 years, maybe 15 years, and may well kill what we're trying to achieve in our lifetimes in respect of trying to achieve a socialist government and trying to achieve an understanding from the next generation that being part of a collective actually can succeed in changing your life and the lives of your friends and colleagues and the lives of your own communities. So I'm appealing to people, you've referenced it already. Gerard Coyne is a figure of the establishment, in my view. I followed him into the West Midlands after he was dismissed from the union for gross misconduct. He was dismissed for his abuses of data, sharing data of the right wing of the Labour Party in order to try and gain an advantage in the last General Secretary election, a claim that was upheld by the Certification Office. His 10 points to the Certification Office were dismissed in their entirety. I'm very proud of the fact that I led that defence on behalf of the union, dismissed in respect of their entirety. Certification Officer also made various commentaries in respect of Coyne's own conduct of his own campaign, which was absolutely disgraceful and brought the entire movement into disrepute. But here we have a man who was then dismissed for his data breaches. I followed him in as regional secretary into the West Midlands, and I can tell you now, Steve, that his playbook, his book in respect of how to treat the union was to put a lid on activism. There was no activism going on in the West Midlands. There had been no political schools for 15 years in the West Midlands. Whenever I went in there, there was no seeking out of champions of the workplaces or communities, no seeking out of the next generation, no attempt to engage with people, no attempt to explain to people that politics affects everything that you do in life, your workplace, your communities, your daily life itself. There was nothing going on in the West Midlands, and that is what his intent would be for the trade union, for Unite. And his writing in the Sun should be a reflection that everybody needs to look at in order to understand the individual that we're dealing with, a man who is quite prepared to go to any lengths and obtain any vote from anywhere in order to try and gain the General Secretaryship of Unite for his purposes, which is to downgrade Unite and ultimately to make sure that the establishment is controlled. But obviously, I am also backing Steve Turner. I'm saying to people very clearly now, do not split the left. Steve Turner has come out and said clearly that he would never give an interview or obviously write for The Sun. The Sun would have no place as far as he's concerned if he was General Secretary of Unite. And while there are always differences between candidates, what is vitally important right here now for our movement is to unify our left and get in behind one candidate, and that candidate needs to be Steve Turner. And then obviously we'll take the union forward together, and I'll hopefully have a big influence in respect of the direction of the union, Steve, and we can make sure that we continue to fight for future generations.
Yes. Now, I think we've got at least 2 more Unite members on the panel. I'm not sure about you, Alan. I'm a Unite member.
I'm Unite.
One of you, so we're all in the
Wow.
family, which is good. I mean, we have got a message in here from Hillary saying that she hasn't got her voting paper yet, nor has her husband. So, what's there's a particular date? I think we're nearly at it, aren't we? Where they should be contacting, is it the union or the ballot company?
Hillary, you should have one. If you look at the union's website, you'll see a hotline there for you to phone up if you haven't got your ballot paper, to make sure that we have your correct address. It does happen. You might have moved, or we might have put your incorrect address in our system. So you should phone that number and make sure that they've got your correct details and they send the ballot paper out to you. So it's a number directly into ERS who are carrying out the election. If you also look at Steve Turner's Twitter page, which is at @SteveT_Unite, he has that number tagged to his Twitter, and it's also tagged to the Unite Twitter. So there's plenty of places to find it, Hillary. So please phone that number, get your ballot papers in, and please cast them for Steve Turner.
Good. Let's move on with the Alan. You've been working on a particular campaign at the moment in Liverpool with regard to an arms fair that's coming up, and had a lot to do with a letter that's been signed by about 63 councillors now, I think.
Yeah.
Condemning that and calling for change. So give us a bit of an update on the background as to this arms fair and how it's, why it wasn't taking place last year and how it's being allowed to go ahead this year. In spite of such widespread objection to it.
Yeah, I mean, about a year ago, we believed that it had been withdrawn after a furore. We had a campaign then, and it turned out it had just been basically kicked into the long grass, and it's resurfaced like, I don't know, like a gremlin, that's had water dropped on its back. And this brings in weapons systems, drones, all the panoply of mass destruction against places like Yemen, Palestine, many other theatres of war. And it's just offensive that it could even be considered that it could be in Liverpool. There's this bizarre setup, we're told, where the ACC is owned by the city council, but they don't have control over its decisions. So it's put us in this horrific position that this thing could go ahead. There's a broad-based coalition. So we've taken a number of initiatives initially, and I've just come from a campaign meeting tonight, which was very well attended. We set up councillors for peace to try and make sure all 4 political parties represented on the city council were united in opposition to this thing. There is a faith group letter being organised, and it's got some incredibly impressive people on that letter, which will probably go public next week sometime. The MPs came out, the Liverpool MPs and the Socialist Campaign Group put out a letter asking for the ACC to rethink. And if they don't, then there'll be an escalating series of events, from stalls and vigils and all sorts of things. So that ultimately, if they do attempt to stage this thing against any morality and against any sense, Unite has got its conference coming up in the autumn in Liverpool. Labour holds its conference. I mean, the idea that you should be making money out of the vultures of war is just offensive to me as an individual. And, those of us in the campaign will do, anything in terms of peaceful measures to oppose this. And I think, if sometime, the whole world's watching, that echoed out from the Chicago Convention, that kind of message echoes around the ACC convention, I'll be a proud man. The whole world can watch as we oppose the vultures of war.
Excellent. Just before we got to Bonnie on that same thing, I'm just going to put across the bottom, if I can find where I've put it. Where's that gone? Didn't work. There we go. 1 second. The Unite missing ballot hotline. I've got the number for that, and I'll pop that on the screen. Bonnie, while I do that, do you want to tell us your perspective? Again, you're a long way from Liverpool, but I know you've taken a firm position on the UK arms industry, etc. before.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I'm a long way from Liverpool, but I'm not a long way from the world. The arms trade is destroying the world around us, and we mustn't forget. And I think it's really important that we remind people that for every weapon sold is a number of more refugees made homeless. And at the same time that we're telling the RNLI to let people drown in the sea, we're encouraging there to be more of them. It's complete madness. It's got to stop.
Howard?
Yeah, absolutely. I suppose everybody will remember, Steve, looking back, that it was Unite members in Rolls-Royce in Scotland who boycotted Chile and blacklisted engines from going across the jets. And we really do need now, as an entire movement, to start talking about what is the reality. And, you know, what's going on in Yemen and other places is just horrendous, obviously, to Palestine. And we have to understand the reality of what we do, as people did back then whenever they boycotted Chile. And so fair play to Alan, and I know the Palestinian Solidarity Group is heavily involved as well, and fair play to everybody in respect of shining a light on this. Is extraordinary. I think I'm correct, Alan, in saying that it was only 12 or 24 months ago that Liverpool City Council made a statement to the effect that it wouldn't be happening in Liverpool, and the building itself is owned by Liverpool City Council. Where it's happening, which is just extraordinary. And I'm sure that the people of Liverpool with their ethics are just holding their head in their hands and just wondering how this can be happening.
Absolutely.
There's that ballot hotline going along the bottom of the screen there. Yeah, we had a question come in from one of the viewers. Let me see if I can find it. Here we are from Kay Smith. With such a low turnout, sorry, we'll go back to the union thing just for a minute because this question came in, but with such a low turnout of members voting, how can you engage with union members, Unite members, to understand the importance of engaging and voting?
Well, we're trying desperately, aren't we, Steve, by using all sorts of methodologies. Like whenever our campaign was up and running, it was very much premised on believing that we could use alternative media to get out there, to unite members and to engage with them. And it is true that historically, certainly within Unite, certain sectors vote more than other sectors. So you will expect the community members and the retired members, who are very politicised, understand what is going on, to vote in heavy percentages, despite the fact that it's a postal ballot. They also vote heavily in respect of manufacturing. But to give you an example, health is our largest sector at the moment, and I'm not sure what the turnout will be there right now. We've just referenced Wes Streeting, and, the flip side of the Wes Streeting story of writing for The Sun is that he'd just been cared for and come through cancer treatment by the NHS. What an opportunity it was for a frontbench Labour MP to shine a light on the privatisation of the NHS and to say that he himself had experienced. He did say that he had experienced the benefit of the NHS, but it was just one reference to it, and then suddenly you move on to talking about crime and adopting the phraseology of Blair and all the rest of it as you try to cozy up to the Murdoch press. But what an opportunity coming out of COVID to talk about the crisis within the NHS that faces us coming around the corner, and to say that his own personal experience meant that he would be standing in solidarity with anyone who takes industrial action as a consequence of their terms and conditions and their treatment as an employee of the NHS. But instead, we move on. And I know I digress, but I'm referencing it because ultimately the way we get people to engage in general secretary elections and any election within the union, because people have to understand the importance of getting into your committees, your regional committees, your sector committees, the importance of Unite activism, lay activism. We set up a structure called Unite Unity Left, and that structure has to thrive. People have to come together and believe that you're part of something now, you're part of collectivism. And in order to do that, we need to use alternative media. And it's the reason why I had central and forefront of my manifesto a commitment to Unite TV, and to say that next time around, next General Secretary election, we will be all over alternative media to tell people of the importance of a position such as Unite General Secretary and the reason why they have to engage in this going forward.
Very good. So we'll go to one last kind of Liverpool specific thing, except it isn't really, but I mean, the particular event here is in Liverpool, but it's a very widespread issue for anybody in the English NHS, at least. Alan, you also said that Liverpool is opposing the integrated care systems. Now, not many people might necessarily know what those are. So if you can, and Bonnie, you're a bit of an expert on this, so feel free to chip in. We'll get a bit of background as to what those things actually are and mean, and then we'll try and educate people on them and try and show what they can do to rally the defence against it in their part of the country.
Do you want me to come in there, Steve?
Yeah, have we lost Alan? Yeah, I think we might have lost Alan for a second. So. Go ahead, Bonnie.
Go on mute for a second.
Bonnie, you go while Alan's fixing his audio.
Okay. So ICS is it's another acronym, deliberately just confusing. Stands for Integrated Care Systems. And what this is the Health and Social Care Act 2012 being brought to fruition. And the purpose of that is to bring social care services into the NHS, which, it sounds really great. It makes sense because the biggest scandal through COVID was the release of COVID patients to care homes, and therefore, so many more people lost their lives. It sounds logical, and it's probably the way it should be. However, 90% of the care provided in the social care sector is run by a private company. People are making money out of this. And so long as that's brought into the NHS, what we're going to see is it's just opening the doors to further privatisation in the NHS. But it's also opening the prospect of means tested care. We've seen people having to pay sell their family homes or put them on new mortgages and capital release and things like that to care for a relative who needs dementia care, for example. I don't think it would be stretching the imagination too much to consider that what we would see if they were integrated as things stand, those sort of measures being brought in for NHS care too. So yes, they should be brought together, but they should only be brought together when social care services are nationalised. Let's nationalise social care services first and then bring the whole thing together. For instance, we've already seen this sort of thing happen with dental care and eye care. There used to be a proper NHS dental service, and it was more or less, it was well affordable for everybody to go and keep their teeth looked after, and your teeth are absolutely vital to your overall health. But now with the cost of visiting a dentist, that's if you can get an NHS dentist, because there are shortages of those right across the country. When you go, there are horrific stories of people in 2021 extracting their own teeth with pliers because they can't afford the so-called NHS charges for their dentistry. It's completely unacceptable. The dentistry, the optometry, the audiology, all of those things were once part of the NHS. And as I said with social care, they need to be brought back in-house, renationalise them. Let's make it a proper, comprehensive service that is publicly provided and publicly paid for and publicly accountable.
100%. Alan, have we got your volume back?
Yeah, can you hear us?
Yeah, that's better.
Right, sound, yeah. Myself and Tim Jeeves is in ill health himself, my fellow councillor, put the motion to the Health Select Committee tonight, and it was voted unanimously. Anybody who's been to any select committee knows it can feel a bit sterile with a relatively small number of people, but actually it was quite moving. People in the meeting talked about their own commitment to the NHS. I was born 5 years after the NHS was founded, and I'm damned without a fight if I'm going to be part of the generation that lets it go. I remember me gran in the 1980s under Thatcher when the privatised, cleaning services come in. She ran a finger along, she was dying of cancer, ran a finger along the ledge and said, "What would I have thought of this?" Because there was dust there. Do you know what I mean? And Bonnie has said, integrated sounds good, health sounds good, but this is packaging up 42 units to open the door to privatisation, to the likes of Virgin Care, to American companies, what Jeremy talked about at the election and got scoffed at. This could be the end of our NHS. This is what we're talking about. And it was disturbing. Very few people actually get it yet. So we passed this motion tonight, but that's a committee. If you get some press coverage, great, social media. But I mean, more importantly, in a way, is we'll be doing things in Liverpool like campaigners from the SHA and Keep Our NHS Public, joining up with fans supporting food banks and going along to where food pantries are provided and going systematically along, the queues and talking to people while they're there, going out into the city centres and having stalls. We've got to do mass campaigning because, I mean, it's into the committee stage. It's hanging, like a Damocles sword above us. This is imminent, and people don't get it. They think the NHS is eternal, and it's so vulnerable. I was trying to pick up a word that's not too, unlistenable on social media, but to the likes of Boris Johnson and his crew, where anything is not a human value, it's a commodity. We are a commodity. And
the thing that encapsulates that probably more than anything, and I don't think we've probably touched on it yet, is the fact that these integrated care systems are structured to incentivize the private companies that get involved in them to provide less treatment.
Yeah,
the less treatment they provide, the more profit they make. So guess what they're going to do? It doesn't.
It's also entirely in the American healthcare insurance model. This is precisely the mechanism that they use in the US. Now, the United States spends much more per head for the healthcare of its population, and yet at the same time, more people are made bankrupt for healthcare in the United States than for any other single reason. Now, there's a disparity there. What we've had in this country is the most cost-effective health provision of any country in the world, and that we are allowing a government to sleepwalk us into a position where we're having to rely on private healthcare companies taking over the low risk operations and functions of our NHS so that the rest of it can wither on the vine is absolutely ludicrous. We've got to really stand against this. There's no two ways about it.
Yes, and I mean, our dear friend Kailash Chand, who tragically died suddenly last week, one of the very last speeches that he gave, he begged the British public to wake up and smell the coffee on that, really, and realise that the NHS is on its last legs and not going to be around for too much longer the way that the Tories are going with it. So we've got to wake up and resist. Howard, we've left you quiet for quite a bit, and I don't like doing that. So, I mean, what's Unate's take and involvement on this? And I know you personally have called a lot for resistance to the Tories' plans on the health service.
Yeah, I don't think it's any exaggeration, Steve, to say that this moment of crisis for the NHS is like none that it's experienced before. And it's a tragedy that it comes after COVID, whenever people have put themselves at risk at the front line for the health of the rest of the nation and lost the lives of colleagues. And here we are watching the dismantling of the NHS before our very eyes, and nobody is standing up and being the voice. And this is where the Labour leadership really needs to look in the mirror and have a word with himself, because if he cannot stand up for the NHS, which is the epitome of socialism, then what can he stand for, frankly, in society? And obviously, Bonnie's quite correct. You're following the model here of Kaiser. Centene is now the largest GP provider in the country. You're quite correct that this whole model is on less care equals more profit. It's quite extraordinary. We're talking, for those people who like the integrated healthcare is really a dangerous phrase, because people naturally assume that it's about tying up health at the front line with the back line with social care, and it's not. It's about bringing in the private sector, and what we're now seeing is the ultimate in that the private sector is running our NHS, but NHS is the badge, and that is track and trace. That is the iconic in respect of where they want to get to with the NHS, that you can call it the NHS, but it has absolutely nothing to do with the NHS. And then you're watching the explosion of the private sector outside of the NHS, because we are going to face backlogs, nursing shortages, and frankly, people leaving the sector. And why would you stay in the sector for a measly 3% whenever you've put your lives at risk, with the insult of being clapped on a Thursday night? Up in hospitals around Birmingham, Steve, they were clapped on a Thursday night in December, and then following April, they were being faced with fire and rehire to change their terms and conditions. For 3% for porters means about 500 quid extra a year. They were forced into work through COVID. And just to give it some idea of perspective for people, The £37 billion that was reported as wasted in track and trace, which is probably more in the region of £70 billion now, but the £37 billion that was first reported as being wasted for track and trace, if you wanted to give the entire nursing community within the whole of NHS England a 15% pay rise, that £37 billion would last for 25 years. That's the type of wastage that we have right here and now. And people should understand that what's happening with the NHS is quite simple. There's a for sale sign that's been placed up on it, and it's to do with the trade deal that's happening in America at the moment. And the NHS is for sale for corporations in America in order to fast track the trade deal. That is the Tory model. You know, people like Simon Stevens, who was the campaign manager for Boris Johnson's very first election, the president of the Oxford Union, and now in charge of the NHS, and about to take a role in the House of Lords in order to fast track everything through and make sure there's no objection in the House of Lords. Samantha Jones, the CEO of Centene, now right at the forefront as the head civil servant, giving advice to Boris Johnson in respect of the NHS. What is happening right now is exactly as Bonnie said it. This is what happened to dentistry and happened to eye care. Before our very eyes, the NHS just disappeared from it. And that's what's going to happen now. And as you say, bigger centres, less care, more profit. It's just extraordinary. And, you know, it would be quite repulsive to many, and obviously to now, but it would be quite repulsive to generations that we now have people who are putting financial budgets on the health of people. And if anybody has any doubt, just look at some of the videos that are on YouTube. I'm sure you can put them up on the chat, Steve, to direct people to the videos on YouTube, where you do have those who have been at the centre of the insurance model in the US, who are now committing their own personal harry-carry in respect of how they conducted themselves, knowing that people lost their lives because they were conducting budgets before they were considering care, and having a reflection upon their own role. And that's what people need to watch. And I'll just make a shout out to Deborah Harrington and to Nico Serco. I'm very keen to see them, their campaign, as part and parcel of what we're doing with Unite. I'm very keen to see them in front of our NISC and to make sure that Unite is shouting about this from the rooftops. And I doubt very well there will be people from Keir Starmer's office watching tonight, and I hope that we say something that can add to the list of reasons as to why they want to expel us. And if they are watching tonight, maybe not for reasons of principle, but maybe for reasons of populism, or maybe for reasons of pragmatism, they can get off their backsides, start talking about the privatisation of the NHS, destroying the service that was created by those who went before us, and start talking about the reality as to what a decent wage is needed for the NHS, start talking about the reality of people losing their lives, start talking loudly about the insult of 3%, start talking about the crisis that is coming around the corner if they don't give decent pay to people, and start talking about basic morality, because people out there in the wider world need to hear it, want to hear it, want some leadership, and want some principle. So even though you might not have any principle if you're watching, you do have pragmatism. And pragmatism is, this is a popular policy, get on the back of it and start fighting for the NHS.
Well said.
Yeah, I mean, the blunt reality is that, I mean, a lot of this started under Tony Blair, and a lot of the people currently on the front bench, including in health, are quite comfortable with the idea of all of this, and have, you know, said, for example, that, you know, voters don't really care who's providing the service as long as it gets provided. Well, if a private company is providing a service, they do care, because they're not going to be getting as much service for the money that goes in. And if you're one of the people who doesn't get your treatment because of that, then damn right you're going to care. So, I mean, for God's sake, do you know, we'll find those links. I don't think I'll be able to get them right now, but we'll find those links and publish them on the social media, etc., so people can see.
The Great NHS Heist is a film that's very much worth watching.
Yeah, that's very good. We've had the person behind that film on the channel a few times as well. Bob Gill, isn't it? So, so we got 15 minutes left, give or take. Let's talk about what's next for the left. I know that's one of the things that was on the list.
In 15 minutes, Steve, are you sure?
Well, we're not going to get it put to rights with that, but at least we can make a start on it and give people some ideas. I mean, we've seen, you know, the Labour Party scrambling to, you know, throw itself off a cliff almost at the moment under its current leadership. Lots of people talking about, you know, alternative parties, setting one up or joining one of the other ones that's kind of sprung up recently. Some people saying you've got to stay in and fight, etc. I mean, what do people on the left do? And, if you're going to try and make a difference, not just to Labour Party politics, but to the whole political and social scene, I guess, in this country, which is, as my wife was on there, my wife's sister lives in Australia this morning, and she probably won't thank me for outing her on this, but my wife told her, said it's really shit in this country at the moment. And it was hard to disagree. So let's go Bonnie first. What's your ideas in terms of what people can do?
Thanks, Steve. The key thing has got to be getting organised in your communities. You need to start supporting each other. We saw at the start of the pandemic, communities coming together to make sure that their neighbours were fed when there were food shortages and empty shelves. And we also saw lots more people getting active, helping out with food banks and things for vulnerable people who weren't able to get to the supermarkets because they were at severe risk from COVID. Now, let's harness that spirit and keep that activism going. I don't want to see people having to rely on food banks, but at the moment they have to. What we need to do is organise on the ground to make sure that they're well supported and that people understand that this should only ever be a temporary sticking plaster over the problem. The more people that understand how much we're being taken advantage of, the better. And the more people we can get involved out in the streets talking about how wrong what's being done to us is, the more chance we've got of making a real change. Because I'm not seeing any opposition to what we've been confronted with for the last 11 years under the current leadership of our party. So it's incredibly frustrating. Get involved in your communities, get involved in your union. Please, if you're not in a union, join one and do what we do. We work together.
Alan?
I agree with all that. I mean, we've spent in our constituency well over a year, getting food parcels to people, setting up food hubs, helping out at food banks. And then it extends to things like, evictions. We've got to be there for that. Every strike that moves, the UCU are fighting a heroic battle in Liverpool at the moment against redundancies. And issues like, the arms fair. We've got to build strength. Try and rebuild strength for the left in the unions, in the community battles. We've also, I think, got to build strength again in the CLPs. I mean, our CLP remained on the left in very difficult conditions, but we shouldn't underestimate the attacks that are coming our way. I mean, we had this Calla report where they said all the problems were about a small group, or allegedly, of councillors or officers, and suddenly all the torchlight is directed at the grassroots. So it'll be 2026 before people can select their own councillors in Liverpool. I mean, that is a heck of a thing. And, we are going to be moved from having all-member CLPs like mine is, which I do think is the preferable option. Everybody has the same vote. Some people might disagree, but moved by compulsion to having a model of the LGC. I mean, myself and a colleague, Alison, we asked why, if the problems were up there, are most of the measures directed down there? And what is it about delegates that somehow makes it better? And we were told, well, that's the way things have been done. That's the tradition. Now, that isn't an intellectual argument for me. That is not an evidence-based reason why you have to move to the model, when we spent months as a CLP debating this and had a democratic vote. So I think we're in an incredibly difficult position. God help us if Coyne gets elected, those problems escalate. We'll know what our relative strength is at conference. And we have had victories over the last period. I mean, Young Labour, the Women's Conference, the NEC delegates. People shouldn't be walking away. People should definitely not be walking away. We should be trying to rebuild the strength of the left, but it shouldn't be in the abstract. It's got to be related to the grassroots battles of working class people, to things like the NHS, and trying to, for God's sake, at least raise the argument with this floundering leadership that you've got to stick up for working class people. I mean, if that isn't the job of Labour, what is it for?
Howard, let's bring you in on that.
Well, I don't really know where to start, Steve. Listen, let me start, I suppose, once again, for those who are watching from Keir Starmer's office, with a bit of pragmatism for them. The reality, obviously, is that we have boundary changes coming around the corner, and those boundary changes will be forced through. The result of those boundary changes will mean that Labour will need an 8% lead in the polls to form a majority government. The harsh reality for a team of people in Starmer's office who right here now are concentrated in focus groups and trying to find policies out Tory to Tories right in the sun, do have a Union Jack behind you whenever you make a speech, is that once those boundary changes come in, there is no out-Torying the Tories that will achieve power for Labour. There's just no chance of it whatsoever. There is no chance of Scotland coming back and red wall seats will be lost. There is no chance of Labour forming a government unless Labour has a transformative agenda that appeals to the country. Unless they have a transformative agenda where communities get behind it, unless you gain a movement that is in reality a revolution, you have no chance of gaining power again. And that was proven by the reaction in 2017, whenever we did touch the doors of 10 Downing Street. And no one within Starmer's office should be looking at 2019 in isolation of 2017. The truth of the matter is, it was probably Keir Starmer himself, whenever he chose to insert "and Remain will be on the ballot paper" in his speech to conference, that was the start of everything going wrong leading up to the 2019 general election. So my commentary to those who are pragmatists and those who are watching focus groups within Starmer's office is that you have no chance of gaining power, even with a minority government, under these boundary changes, unless you grab a transformative agenda that embraces the nations, embraces Scotland, talks of federalism, but talks of the issues that are relevant to today. And the thing that I would say, Steve, to anybody who's watching is those issues are right in our face. We know those issues right here now. Who is going to pay for this crisis? Is it going to be a repeat of 2008 when working people paid for it? Or is it going to be wealth taxes? Will we have a Labour leadership that will stand up and say, we want here and now wealth taxes? Are we going to see further unemployment? Or are we going to see a Labour Party that says we do not believe unemployment is necessary in a country that is so wealthy? Are we going to see the continuation of food banks, or will we see universal income? Or are we going to see the NHS privatised, or will we see somebody stand up for it and say that it must remain in the hands of the state? Are we going to see somebody talk about social services and the underlying need for them in our society in order to have cohesiveness? Are we going to see people stand up and talk about blatant racism and out it where you see it, regardless of the colour of the person's skin who is being racist themselves? Are we going to have somebody who talks for working class people and says that no longer is a minimum wage the maximum wage? Are we going to have somebody who says that we value teachers, nurses, doctors, cleaners, care assistants more than we value the CEOs of the top FTSE 100? Are we going to have somebody who talks about having a ratio of workers' wages to the boss's wages? Are we going to have somebody that talks for the issues that are going on in our communities, talks of nationalisation whenever it comes to broadband, talks of nationalisation whenever it comes to the green industry, talks of federalism, gives away power to people in order to make them more emancipated in their own communities? Are we going to have somebody who believes in socialism and can persuade the wider population that socialism is the key for our society? That's what we need now out of the Labour leadership. And if only for pragmatic reasons, they better get on this bus, because the bus that they are on has no chance. And as they've seen from a handful of electoral disasters, the bus that they are on right here and now is doing nothing but driving itself off a cliff, and will offer nothing for working class people, and will open the door to the far right to get into our communities and breed further racism. That's what's happening. Now, the future for the left, Steve, well, the left needs to come together. This is a lesson that we've heard coming out of the Unite General Secretary election, but it's also the lesson for the left groupings that are within Labour. We need to come together now in order to make a statement of solidarity and a statement of defiance against the leadership. Because the reality for all of us in the left is that the right wing, the centrists, the moderates, the mainstreams, whatever they want to call themselves, I'm not sure when it became mainstream to support legislation that allows you to infiltrate the trade union movement and carry out crimes in the name of the state, but that's an aside. But the reality for them is they are nothing more than internal oppositionalists within the Labour Party itself now. Their whole focus is on the left of the Labour Party. They believe that unity within Labour is getting rid of the left, and that's their only focus right here and now, led by Mandelson, who is their chief architect in respect of looking for a central establishment party of Labour, rejecting socialism, leaning towards state funding and offering no alternative for society. The left needs to come together now and talk about our transformative agenda, reaffirm the role of the trade unions within the Labour Party, and present an agenda to the wider society that talks about nationalisation, talks about saving the NHS, talks about a new deal for workers, talks about the role of the trade unions, talks about having the state involvement in respect of green energy and the green revolution. That's our task now, and that has to happen urgently. The left unions and the left groupings within Labour need to come together before the Labour Party conference to give confidence to the wider membership and to give confidence to the wider voters that there is an alternative message out there, and that alternative message will prevail. And Steve, I'll finish by saying this solely. In the 1930s, there was countless literature written about the importance of the struggle. People had no place to go to. There was poverty all over the place. There was a lack of workers' rights. There were food banks all over the place. There were hunger marches all over the place. And people wrote about the importance of the struggle. And then fast forward to 1946, people come back from the Second World War and they say, we've had enough of this. We want our social state. We want the NHS. We want 1 million council houses. And we want a future for our kids and our grandkids going to third-tier education. We are right in the teeth of the same narrative as the 1930s. We have the food bank going along. We have in-work poverty. We have a Tory government that is racist. We have racism becoming part of society. We have refugees on the streets. We have the criminalisation of the homeless. We are right in the teeth of the 1930s. And what I would say to everybody is the answer then is the answer now. Be part of the struggle, be part of the movement, be part of your trade union, be part of your community. And through that struggle will come ideas, and those ideas will ultimately win the day because there is no alternative offered.
Yes. Well, I was going to ask whether you think the current Labour regime actually cares about winning elections, and I think you probably answered the question on that. I mean, the last couple of minutes, then I want to just look at this here. From Lex, which came in earlier on, but I didn't do much with it at the time because we were in full flow on something else. But Lex said that the NHS isn't protest material, the NHS is national strike material, which seems to fit in with what you were saying there, Howard. But, you know, is it realistic? Can there be enough kind of unity and enough common purpose among everybody who needs it really to actually do something like that in order to save the NHS and force change in this country?
Yeah, I'll jump in, sorry, before anybody else. Yes is the simple answer. And if you can't get if you can't get trade unionists to want to take industrial action coming out of COVID, whenever it's our people who've lost their lives through COVID, and whenever we are essential for rebuilding our nations, if you can't get people right here now to be militant, then we might as well all pack up our bags and go. The simple reality for everyone is the NHS will need Labour more than Labour as in working labour, more than working labour will need to be in the NHS. There are alternative jobs out there for people. If people want to protect the NHS right here now, then let's talk about industrial action. Let's talk about targeted industrial action in the labs. Let's talk about technicians taking industrial action. Let's talk about those who are putting in the keys in respect of people's conditions. Let's talk about them taking industrial action. Let's talk about porters taking industrial action. Let's talk about selective industrial action that makes a difference as so as people stand up, because far too long the establishment has got away with it. It happened in Northern Ireland when the RNLI took their first industrial action in over 100 years because they recognised that they were being used as nothing more than fodder, because people were taking for granted their morality, their goodwill, their purpose in respect of looking after the most vulnerable was being taken advantage of. And right here now, working people have to say that for themselves and for future generations, and to safeguard the NHS itself, and ultimately to safeguard the most vulnerable in society, that militant industrial action is essential.
Can I just say, I agree with all that, but I leafleted one of the biggest hospitals in Liverpool with fellow SHA members, and a tiny minority of the health workers actually knew the threat we were facing. And that means the unions, the labour movement, the campaigners, we have got to, from grassroots level as well, get this message across. It's urgent. It's now that this is happening.
And this is why social media, Alan, is so important. Alternative media, because we're not getting our message out. We know this is happening, but wider society is astonished that this is happening. But this is the truth, and this is why alternative media has to be part of our strategy in respect of fighting back to get that message out there.
And all the more reason why we can't afford any right wingers anywhere near union leadership of any union, because all they do then is really just kowtow or actively collude with the powers that be, with the establishment, and actually disempower working people. Folks, we've had a really good show, I think, and we've gone 9 o'clock, so we're running slightly over. So I'm going to call it a halt there. I do really thank you for your time. Thank you, everybody who's watched, everybody particularly who's participated through the comments. And do watch this on catch up, share it with your friends so they can. And make sure to follow Socialist Telly for their output. And follow all these guys. It's at MyGibbo on Twitter for Alan. Beckett Unite for Howard. Bonnie Craven. Just like that. Is it, Bonnie, I think, for you on Twitter?
Simple. Yeah. Nice
follow these guys. Make sure you keep up with what's going on. And, of course, keep an eye on what's happening on Socialist Telly so we can hopefully start getting everybody informed. Thanks a lot, everybody. And we'll see you again very shortly. Take care.
Yeah. Nice.